Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm honored to give the Philip Gamble lecture, and I want to thank those who helped me get up here. I didn't realize it was going to be as hot here as it is in D.C., but so be it. And Bob, in particular, I want to thank you and for that nice introduction. I'd like to talk today, as you see, about the politics and the economics of affordability in America. In one sense, this is a relatively new focus among policymakers, one that stems from a shock to the price level in 2021 and 22. Note that I just cited a shock to the level of prices, what things cost, not their rate of change, which is inflation. I underscore this because my economist brothers and sisters are much more familiar with inflationary shocks than with price level shocks, that is, with sharp increases in how much things cost. But I will argue with good evidence that when it comes to affordability, the price level, what things cost, matters distinctively from the price growth rate or inflation, though of course the two are intimately connected. In another sense, for many Americans for whom growth has long been more of a spectator than a participatory sport, affordability struggles are as old as economic history. For my whole career, and you heard Bob reference some of this, I focused on inequality, fairness, living standards, capital labor tensions, full employment, minimum wages, and one can easily recognize such themes in the affordability debate, themes that are familiar from earlier debates about market flaws and power imbalances besetting families who lack the resources to meet their basic needs. So if you're thinking what I'm calling the affordability agenda, or which I might just call AA for short, it's just old wine in a new bottle, I won't argue with you, but I will underscore that this nomenclature, the affordability agenda, is politically powerful right now, and I will lay some cards on the table. I am deeply distraught by the current economic policy agenda or lack thereof. On the conservative side, actions by the Trump administration, sweeping tariffs, deportations, deep budget cuts to health and nutritional supports, cuts implemented to only partially offset the fiscal costs of deficit-financed regressive tax cuts, and now cost pressures stemming from Trump's war of choice in Iran, are all actively pushing the wrong way on affordability, not to mention deeply disinvesting in our future. On the Democrat side, at least at the federal level, it is far harder than it should be to point to a developed agenda to address the affordability challenge. There are some examples, particularly around housing, and if we look at some sub-national efforts, like those of Mayor Mamdani in New York City or Governor Spanberger in my state of Virginia, and you'll just note that I went from left to center highlighting the scope of the affordability agenda, you'll see ideas taking shape around housing, childcare, utility costs. In fact, there's nothing partisan about the AA, the affordability agenda. People in states, both blue and red, are challenged by affordability, and politicians on both sides of the aisle claim this mantle. I therefore consider it an important job for economists, policy analysts, professors, and students to help the many people wondering out there who really has their back on this issue to separate the AA wheat from the chaff. To that end, here's what I plan to cover today. First, how did we get here? The origins of the AA were in the pandemic inflation of 21-22, a time when I was in the government and have the scars to show it. This requires a quick review of the facts of the case regarding the ups and downs of inflation. Second, how did a couple of years of high inflation morph into the affordability debate? This part gets into the price level shock point I noted above, drawing on forthcoming paper co-authored with Daniel Posthumus for the Stanford Institute of Economic Policy Research, where, as you heard, I'm a senior fellow. Part 3, what comprises the affordability agenda? Here I'll share a framework that focuses mostly on the price side of the equation, but I'll also provide a policy framework for incorporating incomes and wages. Okay, so part 1. The inflation spike of 21-22. I'll say least about this, though it's foundational to the elevation of affordability issues. But it's a well-known story. It's a pretty straightforward one to explain. And while it's central to the origins of the affordability agenda, it's less so regarding its current status. The slide on the left shows the rise and fall. I think I have a laser pointer here. Oh, yes. Shows the rise and fall of CPI headline inflation. The slide on the right shows the price levels. By the way, I include the grocery component of the CPI, as to this day, this component looms large in the affordability debate. If you ask someone or a politician what they're thinking about in this space, they're going to tell you groceries. Its weight, the weight of groceries in the CPI is around 8%, but its weight in people's mental CPI is many multiples of that. When the pandemic hit, three things happened to drive up inflation. Demand for goods sharply increased. Supply, including labor supply, was constrained, or at least existing supply was insufficient to meet demand, especially for goods. Russia's invasion of Ukraine exacerbated this constraint, especially regarding energy and food prices. And strong fiscal support and excess savings, people had a lot of savings because they weren't spending very much, supported strong consumer spending, again, particularly in goods. It was this collision between strong demand and constrained supply that led inflation to spike, as you see in the graph on the left. Once these forces normalized, as you see in that same figure, at least as much as they could, given Russia-Ukraine, inflation climbed down the other side of the mountain, both for the overall index and for the grocery index. Though both we in the Biden administration and the Fed were pilloried for saying that this spike was likely transitory, we weren't wrong, but it was long transitory, extended by the war, when a lot of people who heard us say that word thought we were talking about weeks, not many months. There were nuances, of course. One of the most interesting to me, though at the time it was a lot more painful than interesting, was the nonlinearity of the Phillips curve. So I'll clarify what that means. Most macroeconomists believe the negative correlation between unemployment and inflation, that right there is the Phillips curve, is quite low. But we found that very low unemployment interacted with tight supply conditions to generate a steeply negative segment of the inflation-unemployment correlation. So in English, all that means is that inflation rose faster and further than pre-COVID correlations predicted. There's also the question of how much did government fiscal policy contribute to this spike, and that became a very contentious discussion. Partisans, opponents of our administration, of course, assigned 100% to fiscal support, but that claim is belied by what you see on this next slide. Inflation went up in every advanced economy over this period. Even Japan, which I think I can find here, even Japan, where disinflation, Japan isn't on this slide, never mind. I had replaced this with a more updated slide, but believe me when I tell you that even Japan, where disinflation and deflation had been the norm, saw an increase in its inflation rate. That said, there is econometric or statistical support for the claim that fiscal policy overfilled the output gap, meaning more than offset the demand destruction caused by the pandemic. Of the 7 or so percentage points that the CPI inflation rose, from around 2 to 3 of those percentage points can be assigned to excessive fiscal support. But that's not the whole story, given that the realistic counterfactual is less, not zero fiscal support. Inflation under any plausible scenario would have peaked at 7 or 8 instead of 9%, and I doubt that difference changes much in terms of what followed. But trade-offs exist, and less fiscal support would likely have meant less poverty reduction of the type that Bob referenced, more evictions, greater cutbacks in government services at both the state and federal level, less infrastructure investment, more business closings, and a less quick return to full employment and full capacity GDP growth. At any rate, back along the path of history that actually unfolded, inflation eventually came down about as quickly as it went up. And yet, when me and my Biden econ team colleagues went on WHNL, which is what we call White House North Lawn, that's where we went and talked to the TV cameras, where we spoke to the media, no one took much solace at all from the fact that inflation was falling. It quickly became clear that the American people were much more unhappy with the price level shock, what you see on the right there, with the price level shock, than they were with the inflation shock. The inflation shock, as you can see, comes down. The price level just keeps going up. It just goes up more slowly. The lesson was that after a positive inflationary shock, people and the price level have something in common. They both have a memory. Okay, that takes me to price two, the price level shock and the birth of the contemporary affordability agenda. Now, that memory point I just made probably sounds a bit obscure, but it's central to my thesis, so let me elaborate. In fact, in a statistical sense, both the rate of inflation and the price level have a memory, though the level's memory is twice that of the inflation rate. So if I run a statistical model where I just regress the log change of CPI inflation on a one-period lag, I get a coefficient of 0.5. If I do the same exercise for the level, the coefficient is about 1. If you then turn to normal people, as opposed to economists, you'll find that they have a much better sense of what things cost in level terms than in change terms. And especially if the price level gets shocked, if prices go up very quickly, as you see there on the right, I assure you, they remember this fact. They remember what things used to cost, and damn it, they want their old prices back. By the way, this fact is sadly germane today as folks are experiencing a new price shock in terms of energy costs from the war in Iran. Anyway, telling them, as I often did, that grocery inflation had come down from 12% to 2%, from 12% to 2%, which for the record was truly really good news, meant less than nothing to them. Their reaction was some version of, you want me to feel better because the price of a dozen eggs is growing more slowly? I want it to fall. Remember, damn it, we want our old prices back. Now that's anecdotal, but here's how Daniel Postmus and I tried to add some rigor to this analysis. We start from an important disconnection in this survey. It's the University of Michigan takes this survey every month, and it's a survey of economic sentiment. And the blue line there is the survey, and you can see it go up and down. The shades mean, the shaded areas are recessions. And so in a recession, you tend to see sentiment get worse. Well, we had a recession with the pandemic-induced recession there, and around, see that big spike in 20 in the blue line, 2020. But then when the pandemic recession was over and the economy came roaring back, which it did, sentiment just kept going down. Now, what's that other line, the red line? I think it's the red line, the middle line. So this line, which I believe is red. I'm colorblind, but I think I was told earlier that that's red. That is a prediction. So we build a statistical model using unemployment, inflation, the stock market, returns to the S&P 500, and real consumer spending. And just using those four simple variables, we explain the heck out of economic sentiment. Our model runs from 1990 to 2019. And yet, if you backcast, it explains what was going on back in the 50s. Those dots are there because they didn't take the survey every month. They took it irregularly. So basically, a few variables explaining the economy explain how people felt about the economy for decade upon decade until we hit the pandemic. And at that point, the expectation, the prediction, the red line, sort of goes back to where it was before. The economy's fine, so sentiment ought to be fine. And yet sentiment itself goes down. It tanks. And here's a point for you I wouldn't have made, probably when I wrote this, I didn't know this. Last week, I think it was, we got the preliminary number for the April UMich this sentiment index. It was the lowest on record, going back to 1952. That's before I was born. Okay, so ancient history. Lowest on record, while unemployment's kind of low and GDP's pretty good, et cetera, et cetera. What the heck is going on? Why does the model fail to now predict? Based on my experience in 22 and 23 out there on WHNL, as inflation began to climb down the other side of that mountain, yet the economic mood of the American people remained sour. I wrote remained sour. It got more sour. Daniel and I Oh, sorry, I don't know what just happened, but we're good, right? Daniel and I derived a trend break or a price spike variable that's shown in this slide. Oh, sorry, I forgot to, I skipped over this slide. What you see there in the green, I think it's green line, is the affordability gap as measured from that model I just showed you. What you see in that blue line is Google Trends, people asking about affordability. And you see that before there was not much to say about either one of them. Affordability wasn't that big a problem, at least in Google Trends terms. And then affordability our model shows this affordability gap, meaning the gap between how people felt and how you'd expect them to feel given the economy and the people, inquiries into Google Trends. And so we just thought this was an example of how this, was a real thing. So what we then realized, what we recognized, was we need to figure out a way to capture how people are souring on the economy. And it felt to us, it felt to me, having gone through this, again, trying to explain these things to the American people, that that there was something going on in prices and how much things cost, and that we need to put that in the model, not just inflation, but what things cost relative to what they used to cost. And that's what we do here. So this is a variable that we put in the model, and it just cuts a smooth trend through the CPI level over all these years, and it runs that trend starting in 2019 through the end of the series, and we take that gap between the trend and the actual, and we plug that into the model, and lo and behold, what happens? This bottom line here, whatever color that is, you see that actually closes the gap. Once we account for this shock to how much things cost, the affordability gap closes. So that to us was a strong indication that, that this price level shock was kindling for this heated affordability concerns that developed over this period. I'm actually going to skip the next figure in the interest of time. Oops, that was the last figure. Well, maybe I will get to that, but for now, I'm just going to talk about the question. Okay, so now we think we have an understanding of the difference between how people are feeling about the economy and how these positive indicators have historically tracked that sentiment. The question then becomes, what do we do about it? This is the last and in some ways maybe the most important part of my talk to you today. How should policymakers frame the affordability agenda? I believe the stakes are very high to this. What do the blueprints of the policy architecture look like? What are some examples of policies that could help people meet the affordability challenge they face? And so the last section of my talk I call the affordability agenda itself. Now, to many of my economist brothers and sisters, affordability as the basis for an economic policy agenda doesn't make much sense. The reason is that they mistakenly think it implies a desire to lower the overall price level, and one of the only ways to reliably do that is to have a deep and long recession, and nobody wants that. In a recent New York Times op-ed, I explained my view of the political economics of the AA, developed through lots of work with policymakers and policy analysts. I wrote that the AA, the affordability agenda, can be defined by two simple criteria. First, it is focused on a narrow set of essential, big-ticket items that define the affordability problem for many consumers, including childcare, housing, healthcare, and electricity. Second, it highlights how market flaws boost these prices. There's nothing in there about the overall price level, and in fact, for most of what we buy, markets work well. And given that price signals are as important as ever, we want to avoid messing with them if we can help it. In search of a policy framework for goods and services that fit the criteria above, Neil Mahoney and I developed this three-legged stool, wherein each leg broadly captures ways to diagnose and prescribe in the affordability space. The first leg is enhanced supply. While many regulations have societal benefits that justify their costs, removing procedural sludge that makes it too slow and expensive to build will increase the supply and lower the cost of goods and services that constitute the affordability crisis. For my Econ 101 fans, a key part of the AA is simply pushing out supply curves and reducing any barriers that constrain such movements. The second leg is competition policy. In sectors like healthcare, food production, airlines, communications, among others, insufficient competition pushes up prices and reduces choice, all while generating excess profits for existing companies. Enacting pro-competitive policy can promote affordability and increase choice. The third leg is subsidies. In the cases of housing, healthcare, and childcare, for example, we cannot count on either removing friction-inducing barriers or ample competition to fully ease affordability constraints. Direct subsidies are needed for low and middle-income households to afford these key parts of their family budgets. With those three legs supporting us, let's drill down to some of the tools that can help operationalize this affordability agenda. Start with the do no harm principle. The first item in the AA would be to roll back Trump's sweeping tariffs, though the existing revenue loss would exacerbate our already shaky fiscal outlook. Doing so would be a straightforward and surefire way to lower costs, as these import taxes are jacking up consumer prices and distorting economic production. By rolling back tariffs, policymakers can deliver on a promise to reduce prices on day one. Now, for the record, it remains the case that as a narrowly targeted tool, tariffs can be a useful and potent weapon against unfair trade. But you want to wield that weapon against rubber tires grade 4, not Canada and the European Union. Providing government subsidies for the affordability portfolio sounds good to those looking for quick help, but it works best in settings where supply is elastic enough or responsive enough to accommodate the increased demand. In supply-constrained markets like housing, subsidies primarily result in higher prices, reducing their affordability firepower and generating a bigger price tag for the government. In other words, sequencing matters. Combining consumer subsidies with policies that make it faster and cheaper to build can be an effective one-two punch if we first expand supply through streamlining reforms to allow faster, less expensive production, followed by demand-side subsidies to address affordability. Getting the sequencing backward risks causing prices to spike over the short run. When it comes to competition, economists love competitive markets as much as Americans love apple pie. And when I talk to standard issue economists about the AA, this is the idea they like the best. And for good reason. Preventing harmful consolidation and enacting pro-competitive policies will lower prices, raise quality, and improve economic efficiency. So too will policies that help entrepreneurs and small businesses enter markets and grow their companies without being blocked or otherwise thwarted by powerful incumbent firms. On the other hand, if you really want to get an economist to clutch their pearls, just say price controls. And to be fair to my fellow econ travelers, I too can reach for the smelling salts when a policymaker wants to control prices by fiat. The reason is straightforward. Increased supply is often key to the AA, and the government price controls can jam market signals that incent producers to expand supply. In other words, price controls can help some people in the near term while making life less affordable for more people over the longer term. But there are two reasons why anyone thinking about the affordability agenda policy design, the AA policy design, needs to think about price controls. First, if you've ever worked with politicians, you know that most of them heavily discount the future. I'm not throwing shade. The incentives push them hard in that direction. But if they've got a policy that will help people, voters, loosen an affordability constraint today, they'll often take it, tomorrow be damned. Relatedly, Neil and Bharat Ramamurthy raised what they call the affordability time conundrum. People struggling to make ends meet want and need help today. But even an efficiently designed, low-barrier supply build-out can take years. For this reason, there's an interesting pattern developing in AA policy proposals. Control, cap, or manage a price in the near term, but do so only conditional on two design features. One, the price control is contingent on progress in increasing supply, no supply improvements, no price relief. And two, the control is temporary. Now, the politically minded among you may see one problem already. Good luck taking off a price control that's been in place for a while. A cardinal rule that can be observed in our increasingly unsustainable budget path is that it's much easier for politicians to giveth than it is for them to taketh away. But the fact is that some price controls have been both implemented and taken down in recent years, though more in Europe than here, particularly to offset sharply spiking utility costs after Russia invaded Ukraine. Mexico has a voluntary grocery price control program in place wherein retailers and wholesalers who agree to hold down costs in a market basket of essential foodstuffs get a break on taxes and fees. On the other hand, I'd say the track record on rent control is that it has suppressed supply in precisely the counterproductive way economists worry about. Okay, let's get down to cases. Child care is an essential and often unaffordable component of many family budgets. In the most expensive places across America, child care can cost more than $20,000 a year, a burden for even relatively high-income families. Those who need it most, young parents, often don't earn enough to signal the market to supply what's needed in this space, especially at the quality we want for our kids. So unless a young family is uniquely wealthy, the government must subsidize their child care purchases. Importantly, unlike housing, for example, there do not seem to be steep zoning or regulatory barriers blocking the addition of new child care supply. And recent research suggests that robust public investment in the child care sector tends to pretty quickly generate new supply, which helps to restrain price growth. Now, based on the framework I've laid out thus far, this is a good case for leg three of the stool, government subsidies to help families pay for child care. To be clear, that's a fiscally expensive proposition. Viable plans tend to score as costing $500 billion or more over a decade, and a whole other work stream of mine is to worry and to warn people about our unsustainable fiscal path. That, however, is a different and much less fun lecture than this one. Housing supply, specifically affordable housing, is, of course, also very much in short supply. About a quarter of homeowners and half of renters spend more than 30% of their income on housing in 23. There are tens of thousands of different housing jurisdictions across America, and one thing they tend to share are zoning rules and other regulatory sludge that discourage developers from building affordable homes. That said, we must also realize that such rules are designed to protect the housing wealth and perceived amenities of incumbent homeowners who are a powerful political force. Colleagues from the Center for American Progress and I worked on an affordable housing plan that embodies the principles I've set forth. The plan allows the federal government to use its leverage to encourage undersupplied communities to finance new, affordable, multifamily housing, expand the production of modular housing, and scale up existing local programs that are eliminating barriers to affordable home building. It provides quick rental relief, but only if communities take actions to increase the supply of affordable rental housing. By the way, Trump's tariffs are guilty here as well. They're raising the cost of building, adding over $17,000 to the construction of the typical home, and according to Center for American Progress research, reducing building by 450 units by 2030. Fixing our broken healthcare market is at the top of the AA. The government plays a huge role in this market, of course, through the Affordable Care Act, through Medicare, Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, drug negotiations, and more. These programs enable millions of people to get health care they otherwise couldn't afford. But we pay too much for it, relative to both other countries and to American families' incomes. Our health system is twice as expensive as those of our international peers, suggesting that the government could spend less and consumers could pay less, though many with their hands in the U.S. healthcare cookie jar would earn less. Getting there requires loosening rules that restrict supply of medical professionals, capping hospitals and doctors' charges, expanding Medicare access, and allowing federal agencies to negotiate lower prices on many more drugs than is currently the case. Electricity costs comprise considerably smaller shares of most household budgets, but costs have recently been outpacing inflation, and consumers are justifiably worried about externality costs spilling over from data center build-outs. Politicians are starting to run successfully on capping electricity prices and forcing data centers to internalize more of the costs they're adding to the grid. Policy design in this space should pair any short-term relief, whether that's rate freezes or subsidies to users, with policies to modernize the grid and bring more power generation online. As if we needed a reminder, Trump's war of choice in Iran and its impact on energy and other costs, including food, remind us of how counterproductive it is to reverse Biden-era policies to generate more domestically produced renewable energy. Every time somebody says Hormuz, please remind them that renewables are by far the fastest growing and least expensive sources of increased energy supply. Now, each of these ideas, providing young parents with the resources to afford quality childcare, increasing the supply of affordable housing, lowering healthcare costs, expanding the supply of clean energy to lower electricity bills, is realistic. The party that promises and delivers on this agenda would position itself at that all-too-rare intersection of good policy and good politics. Before I conclude, I want to be sure to say a few words about the other side of the AA. Affordability isn't just about prices, it's also about wages and incomes, and thus the AA must include policies to help there as well. I'll say less about this part of the agenda, not because it's less important, but because it's much better known, thanks in part to good works done by many scholars from this university. To make sure that the bakers get a fair slice of the pie they're helping to bake, we need to ensure the persistence of full employment labor markets. This argument goes back to Keynes, of course, and the empirical record behind it is strong. The bargaining clout of middle and lower wage workers rises with the tautness of the job market and falls as it slackens. Maintaining full employment is, of course, one half of the U.S. central bank's mandate, and Keynesian fiscal policy is also relevant in this context. At this point, most workers live in states or cities where minimum wages are above the absurdly low federal level of $7.25. The federal wage floor, last legislated back in 2007, is now largely a southern wage floor, and any AA worthy of support must update that number. Even with tight labor markets and higher minimum wages, many working families' incomes will be too low to maintain a decent standard of living. To help close this gap, robust work supports, which often take the form of refundable tax credits, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit or the Child Tax Credit, must be maintained and in some cases expanded. The CTC, the Child Tax Credit, in particular, should be fully refundable, as under its current structure, the nation's poorest families with kids don't get the full credit. Full employment conveys some degree of bargaining clout, but greater union membership and coverage is the most direct way of raising workers' chances to get a fair slice of the pie. Two necessary reforms in this space include moving from individual workspace bargaining to sectoral bargaining, and significantly increase the punishment on employers who violate labor laws and illegally block union formation. The current system barely slaps their wrists. Finally, while we cannot yet know the extent to which AI will displace or complement work, labor, jobs, our stance should be to hope for the best and plan for the worst. That plan should include, at the very least, updating our antiquated unemployment insurance system and reforming our worker training system to raise the odds that technology is labor augmenting versus labor replacing. But it should go further than that, developing potential wage insurance and guaranteed jobs alternatives. Hopefully we won't need to break that glass, but if we do, we should be ready. Okay, that's a lot of economic and policy granularity, and I thank you for your patience in this warm room. But let's not lose the bigger picture here. Our nation faces an existential crisis. Democracy is under threat from an authoritative regime that is unchecked by the very checks and balances the founders of our system intended to block such a threat. But this group is hacking democracy, and as if you're paying attention, which I very much hope you are, they're alarmingly good at it. But they also have a fatal flaw. They have neither the policy chops nor the ideology to craft and implement an affordability agenda. And what's surprising to me is that they're not just failing to address people's affordability concerns, they're pushing hard in the other direction. And people know it. As I told you, that UMich sentiment survey I was showing you earlier, its preliminary result for this month, for April, is the lowest on record in a survey that dates back to 1952. Now, it's probably possible for the opposition to defeat this regime based on the fact that they're not them. In fact, there's a decisive group of swing voters who seem quite stuck in the mode of cycling through incumbents until some party actually helps them to reconnect their economic well-being to that of the overall economy. Now, if that's true, as I believe it to be, then crafting and implementing the affordability agenda may be our best hope of reestablishing a progressive, lasting, inclusive, worker and family-centered coalition. For the rest of my time in this business, that's my life work. From what I know of this university and this economics department, I suspect I'm not alone in this existentially important pursuit. Thank you. We're going to have, let me check, I don't have a time. We're going to have a Q&A, a Q and A. Please line up in a single file in the center of the middle aisle, and we'll get you a mic and take it from there. You can take it off. I'll just go from here. Leave it as a backup. Your questions? Actually, I think I can move around, right? Yeah, great. Nice to see you, and good for being brave and coming up to the mic.
Someone had to do it.
Exactly. Thank you.
So you mentioned specifically Mayor Mamdani's plans. How do you believe they've been successful or unsuccessful?
Okay. Did everybody hear that? Because I wasn't sure.
I'm not sure the microphone's on.
You mentioned Mayor Mamdani's plans. How would you judge how successful or unsuccessful they've been? Well, he hasn't been there, he's hardly been there very long, but I would say very successful. I'd give the guy an A+. And by the way, I saw a graph the other day that showed potholes filled, for various years, and so it goes like this. Before he got there, this, each one of these is a year, and then he comes in and it goes like that. So this is what I call hold on, I'm sorry, what? Are you hearing okay? Okay. This is what I call sidewalk socialism. He's filling potholes. He's delivering on child care, universal child care. He did an interesting thing the other day. He made sure he's expanding child care sort of sector by sector. I'm just here. I'm going to go here because it's just not, there's a lot of feedback. So I'm just not hearing very well. That's better. He's going neighborhood by neighborhood, and one of the things he did was to go to a wealthy neighborhood early on in the plan. And he was criticized, saying, well, why would they can buy child care, right? He said, because universal means universal. So I have a lot of respect for what he's trying to do. He can only do so much. As the mayor of New York, he needs the backing of the governor. And when it comes to child care, for example, Governor Hochul is behind him. So I'm impressed by what I'm seeing so far, but it's early days.
And do you believe that it kind of goes against the belief that fiscal policy is only done by the federal government, while he is not federal at all?
Yeah, well, that's not a belief I would ever subscribe to, because we have all these subnational governments that are doing, good things and less good things with fiscal policy. So, yeah, let's get to the next question. Thank you.
This was a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
You hit every topic except the one that I wanted to really hear about, which was groceries. So I think, everybody, we see the groceries go up, and as a parent, that's hard to get over. So from that perspective, sure. But also from the sort of perspective of the attack on farmers and the soybean issues with the increase in tariffs, the retaliation by China, and the loss of the soybean market, the loss of farms, how does that fit into sort of the AA, and how do we get that to work better?
Well, lucky for you, the Center for American Progress, where I'm also a policy fellow, recently published a report answering your question. So you should go online and find it. I can't remember what it's called, but it won't be hard to find, and I think I'm the lead author. It has a number of policies that speak to the challenges you raised, particularly regarding creating more upstream competition in food production. But the real challenge was coming up with something as I mentioned in my talk, that helps people with grocery prices today. And we proposed something that's based on this Mexican program, which I actually mentioned in my talk, and which Isabella Weber here has written about. And this is a program, a voluntary program, where if you're a food retailer or wholesaler and you agree to hold a market basket of goods to a fixed price level, you get some good things back. And we cut your swipe fees, for example. So check it out and see what you think.
Will do, thank you.
Hi, I had a question about the economic sentiment graph, and I noticed that there was a lack of a split between the price shock model and the normal one during like stagflation in the 70s.
Great point.
And I
Yeah.
was wondering if you had any ideas, if you knew why that was.
Okay. So great question. Great point. We looked at that. And it's in our, so this paper that I wrote, it's a paper co-written with a guy named Daniel Postumus over at Stanford, and I'm going to post it any minute now. I haven't gotten around to it. It's being published by CEPR, but I'm going to put it on Google Drive, if not today, then tomorrow. And there's a section on the part that you asked about, and what we find is that there wasn't much to explain back then, because it's a little hard to tell because it's just dots, but there's not that much of a divergence between what the model predicts and what people were telling you they felt, right? Those little dots kind of line up right along with the model. And so people were just much less thrown by the price shock that they were experiencing in those years. So that begs the question, why not? Why are they so much more thrown by a price shock now than they were then? And I have a couple of speculative reasons. One is because inflation was really low for 20 years, this time. That wasn't the case back then. Inflationary shocks came more fast and furiously. And so people weren't as thrown by shocks because they didn't have decades where there was no shock. Secondly, social media and vicious partisanship. So when I was in the White House and we were fighting this vibe session, people with 2 million viewers were posting a receipt, like, I just went to Target and look what happened. And that's a force multiplier, that's an amplifier, and that wasn't going on back in the 70s. But check out the paper and see if we scratch that good question.
Thank you so much.
Hi. First of all, my name is Khalif Ahmed. I'd like to thank you for coming here. My question is, why haven't the tariffs that were imposed in Trump's first administration were reversed as part of the Affordability Act?
The tariffs, so some of those tariffs were pretty targeted. They were less sweeping. And as I said in my talk, if you look at the history of tariffing, it's actually an effective tool when it's applied to something pretty narrow. So we had a tariff, I didn't love this, by the way, and in fact I argued against it, but we had a tariff on electric vehicles. Now, China massively subsidizes its electric vehicle production, and American car makers would have been at a competitive disadvantage if those were in tariffs. So in some way, the tariff offsets the really very deep subsidy. That said, I kind of like what Canada is doing in this space. Canada is saying, okay, China, you can sell 50,000 of your EVs here, but you have to agree to a joint Canadian-Chinese production so we can learn how to do it. So there are ways around that. But I think there's a difference between targeted and sweeping tariffs. I'm seeing a pretty long line, and I have to get to the airport, so I'm going to try to be quick.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, Professor. Hi, I'm William Chen. What I wanted to ask you is, why do you think that the affordability of childcare has become such a major piece of the agenda in progressive circles lately? Was it less of a concern before the pandemic, or should it have been a larger part of the docket even before then?
Well, first of all, that's a good question for Nancy Fulbright if she's around anywhere. I mean, not right now, but she has much more expertise in that than I do. There's been progressives have long worked on trying to solve this child care affordability problem. And that's kind of what I meant at the beginning of my speech with old wine and new bottles. I'm putting a lot of old wine under this rubric of the affordability agenda, and I would say childcare fits there. It's been an important part of an equality agenda. It has been shown to help caretakers, particularly moms, get into the labor force. So it's had a good track record. I think it's getting amplified now just because the affordability agenda is more amplified, but it's been around for a while. Next.
Mr. Bernstein, thank you for coming here. I just want to ask you a question. I don't know if you ever really thought about the answer, but if you could ever devise a way to decrease unemployment and also decrease inflation at the same time, how would you go about that?
Whoa. So I actually think that historically, so if you, actually, let me go back here to, oh, it's in a different lecture, the lecture I did earlier today. The fact that the correlation between unemployment and inflation has been really very low for very long means that that trade-off isn't as big a deal as a lot of people worry about. And one of the things that Dean Baker and I wrote about when we started writing books about full employment, we wrote 2 of them, is we said it's called the Phillips curve, but this relationship between unemployment and inflation is much flatter than people think. And we can get to lower unemployment without inflation spiking. So the implicit in your question is that there's sort of a steep trade-off. There's usually not that steep a trade-off. The thing that happened in the pandemic is that the Phillips curve went nonlinear at very low unemployment and a supply shock. And that made a segment of the curve very vertical. But most times, I don't think we have to worry too much about that trade-off. We have to be mindful of it, but don't over-torque on it. Next.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I had one question. You mentioned in your affordability agenda that raising nominal wages is an important part of that. How would you offset the inflation that comes with raised wages?
Well, again, I mean, I think that it's interesting. So I just talked about how the correlation between unemployment and inflation isn't that high. I think the wage Phillips curve is a little steeper, so it's decent. Your question is a good one. So that wage growth does feed into inflation. I mean, the way I tend to think about this, Alan Blinder said this: wages cause prices, and prices cause wages. So there's an indeterminacy of which way the causation goes, but distribution within the share of labor is one answer to your question. So if you have if workers at the high end are getting rents, excess compensation, bargaining power can redistribute that compensation from the top to the bottom, which is one reason why many in the employer class get nervous at very low unemployment. So any distribution within labor share is de facto not inflationary. Next.
Thank you.
I'm like, this is a Taylor production line here.
Hello, thank you. My question is about housing and affordability. This might be, I'm a political science major, so this might be a little more policy, but I know that housing is too expensive. There's a lot of things that can be done, like building more housing, limiting corporations from buying the housing, but what do you think is the best economic policy to make housing more affordable for young people who don't see buying a house in the future?
Yeah, great question. And I have, well, they're not that young anymore, but I have children who, probably around your age who are worried about that too, so that strikes home. Well, so again, like I said to the earlier gentleman, one of the things we're doing at the Center for American Progress is writing policy briefs on exactly these questions. And I think our housing, I have mixed feelings about our food one, but our housing one was really good. And so you should read that where we answer the question. I would say to give you a little more on that, the thing that's blocking the construction of affordable housing, which is really an important adjective here, because actually the incentives to build high-end housing are there, and we're building we don't have a problem with luxury housing. Building affordable housing does not pencil out for developers. They need a subsidy if they're going to build affordable housing. Given what it costs to build affordable housing, especially given the procedural sludge, land costs, zoning, labor, all of that, not to mention the tariffs adding $17K to the project, all of that makes it very hard for a developer to pencil out affordable housing. So there needs to be a subsidy there. And so of our three-legged stool, that one is, on the subsidy part.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Good question.
Hello, my name is Andrew Walstrago. I just wanted to say thank you again for coming in. My question was kind of adding on to that with affordability. We saw in the graphs how kind of affordability, the crisis is kind of happening and how inflation was going up as well as partially with unemployment. I was just wondering, with the pattern of the graphs, which we've seen in decades, we're at the lowest point, what is your prediction for what will happen for the next few years?
I think that I guess I'm not sure if I'm confusing thought or hope, but the intersection of my thought and hope is that what I said here today is all true. That's not a thought or hope. That, I believe, is the case. And that the power of this agenda is both the power of this agenda is that politicians recognize that we could actually build a coalition on this. Just like Democrats had a labor coalition for many years, I'm advocating an affordability coalition. And you can't just craft the policies, by the way. You have to deliver them and implement them. But if we can craft, deliver, and implement those policies, big if, I have great confidence that the kind of horrific political economy we're looking at right now could turn out to be a lot better. Next.
Thank you for your lecture today. My name is Michael Flavin, and my question is, what originally interested you?
That's me, sorry, go ahead.
What originally interested you in social work, and how has that contributed to a career in economics?
I was born in a family where there was a poster on the wall that said, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I was a child of white privilege, and I was raised to give something back. Now, Bob mentioned I was a musician, so, when I was a musician, I was in New York City in 1970s and 80s, and I was seeing lots of inequality develop and, carrying my bass onto the subway and walking over homeless people. And I thought, no, this is not right. I was raised to try to help with this problem. So I got into social work to try to become more of a solution, more of part of the solution. And I worked with individuals. I recognized pretty quickly that I wanted to intervene on a more systemic level. So I got into economics and economic policy.
Thank you. I hope to also contribute to the solution.
I hope so too. Good question.
Hello, Mr. Bernstein. I'm Oliver Newberg, and I was, when you mentioned the part where you said the clean energy industry is one of the fastest growing sectors of the economy, how do you think the clean energy as well as other environmental aspects of the economy tie into affordability?
Important question. I mean, what I said was every time somebody says Hormuz, please remind them that renewables are by far the fastest growing and least expensive sources of increased energy supply. Yeah. And there's the intersection right there. If people want to talk about the Green New Deal and try to sell, big energy, renewable projects on the basis of jobs and economic flows, be my guest, maybe it'll work better than it has in the past. I believe that this connection is the one that we should really be working on. Just really emphasizing the extent to which, if we want energy costs to be more affordable, especially in a world where AI data centers are sucking up so much more of it, which, by the way, is an externality that we need to make them internalize, then we need to make a connection between renewables, the price point that I just made, and affordability.
Thank you for your time and coming out here.
You're welcome.
Hello, sir. Thank you for your talk. You kind of touched on the rhetoric of Mr. Biden and how he, wanted more domestic manufacturing. When I think of this, I think of the CHIPS Act. Having more semiconductors in the U.S. When comparing this to something like Mr. Trump's approach to domestic, manufacturing, tariffs, immigration policies, how do you kind of walk the fine line in between them? And is there kind of a difference between an input price versus like the final product, like a semiconductor?
Well, I think that the sweeping tariff approach does not work, and that our industrial policy was working a lot better. We were actually seeing a sharp increase in the construction of manufacturing firms, factories and computer fabs, fabrication plants. The reason, by the way, why Trump's tariffs don't work in terms of reindustrialization or building manufacturing jobs is because 1/2 of our imports are inputs into our domestic manufacturing. So he's making domestic manufacturing much more expensive, and of course that's why I think the industry has been slumping for a while. So there you have it.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for your time. I'm wondering about your thoughts on the scale and or impact of tax policy on wealth inequality. I know you mentioned tax credits and increasing them, but I was wondering the Affordability Act includes further, more like federal level tax reforms and how probable they are.
Okay, so just to be clear, I mean, it's a great question. There is no Affordability Act. I've been talking about this thing I call the Affordability Agenda. That lives in here. So there needs to be, and there should be, and maybe you'll write it. It's very important for the costs engendered by the Affordability Act to be offset. I don't think we should, continue to deficit finance all this stuff, and that calls for progressive taxation. I think the best thing to do on that, and I should have said this when the room was full, is subscribe to my Substack, because yesterday on tax day I wrote about this very question and how we could raise some of the revenues we need for this affordability agenda. And yes, it's progressive taxation. There's interest in taxing wealth these days. That's challenging. But I want to move from an estate tax to an inheritance tax. I introduced the idea of perhaps a progressive VAT. There's way more than we have time to talk about right now. But the bottom line is, yes, I talked about childcare. I see programs, Nancy would have a better idea, but I see programs in the childcare space that cost, $500 billion over 10 years. I don't want to deficit finance that. I want to raise the resources to have pay-fors.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time for coming here. My question is, if you had to prioritize a single policy within the affordability agenda that you believe would deliver the most meaningful impact in near term, which would it be and why?
Well, that's a really hard one. Yeah, I have, yeah, right, I love all my children. I don't have an answer for you yet because I don't know the following, but here's how I would want to answer that question. I would want to know which of, so there's only five, I think I have something like 5 things on this. There's housing, healthcare, childcare, electricity, groceries. Groceries are really hard, so put that aside. I don't really know how to do that. But I would want to find out which one of those had the most political juice. Which one of those would, really, if we could deliver this one thing, which one would be most persuasive to voters in terms of, yeah, you've helped me, sign me up for your coalition. Sometimes I think childcare might be the answer. I'm not sure. Next.
Firstly, sir, thank you for your time and for your talk today. My question is more related to AI and its disruption on employment and the job market in the future. And more specifically, if you think if the government or the state should make some sort of intervention, whether it be through tax on AI or tax on companies that introduce AI that replaces human labor. So I wanted to know what your perspective was and if...
Yeah, I don't think I would tax companies that replace human labor because there's just been such a long history of automation, and not all automation is labor replacing. Some of it's labor enhancing, and I don't really want to get down to the level of intervening in companies' business to the point of like, here's who you should, here's how many people you should hire, and we'll ding you if you don't. Instead, what I would do, as I mentioned in my talk, is we really need to build, and Perry would be a good place to think about this. I probably have already. I know Jerry Epstein's program has policies probably in this space. We really need to think about AI insurance or AI resilience, however you want to frame it. I like the insurance idea. The idea that we don't know whether AI will be more labor augmenting or labor displacing, but let's assume, for point of argument, as I said, hope for the best, plan for the worst. Let's assume it's heavily displacing. If that's the case, we need to upscale the unemployment, modernize unemployment insurance, try to structure training programs to enhance complementarity versus displacement, but then wage insurance, job guarantees. I would look into all of those options.
All right, thank you.
Yep, last question.
In your presentation, you highlighted the main weakness of the current administration is that they are unable to implement an affordability agenda, but they're still in power for at least 3 more years. So, and a lot of us can't wait. So what are some of the ways that the affordability agenda can be implemented right now at a time?
Well, okay, so first of all, I didn't mean to say that, this is the main problem with the Trump administration is that they're not implementing affordability. That's one of many problems. So I don't want to rank that. But that's a big problem. It's a big problem for them. It's actually a big opening for the opposition. I actually, I take your point and I'll answer your question, but I do think that it could take a good 2-3 years to really plan this and to articulate it and to get it out there in ways that people understand it. So we need to get to work on that. The answer is, of course, subnational, state and local. So it's happening. I mean, in ways that somebody needs to document, maybe me, maybe you. There are at least 24, I could probably rattle off half of them, subnational, basically, local housing projects that are building affordable housing. I mean, there's a great one in Montgomery County near where I live. There's a great one down in Atlanta. I mean, they're happening because local politicians tend to be more accountable to their constituents. We talked about Mamdani. We talked about Spanberger and Micah Sherrill in New Jersey. They're working on affordability through capping electricity prices with the policy design that I mentioned. That is, you don't put on a price control unless you play defense on supply expansion, because anytime you control the price, you have to worry that you're dampening a supply expansion signal from prices. So they're doing that. And so look at subnational and you'll see a lot of examples of what we're talking about.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. That was the last question. I don't know. Where's Bob Poland? Do I have? Okay, quick.
I'll be really quick. I'm sorry, I'm indecisive. So earlier you mentioned that you got into economics because you wanted to help people. You mentioned when that person asked their question about New York and the subway, and you just wanted to make things better overall. I guess I just wanted to ask, after you obtained your economics degree, how did you go about actually taking steps towards reaching a position where you could actually make an impact?
I worked, I'm trying to remember what happened. Let's see. I started working with campaigns. I started working with campaigns. So I worked, I helped the Obama campaign. And if you work on a campaign and they win, they sort of got to give you a job. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
You're going to say some closing words?
Okay. Thank you very much, Jared. The economics department is an international leader in the analysis and policies to address inequality and to establish an equitable and just society. The Gamble Lecture is our biggest event, and I was really happy this evening to see such a large crowd show up. Thank you very much. And I was very pleased with the presentation by Jared. Thought the presentation was great. The answers to the questions were quite informative. And boy, we have some really smart students.
Yeah.
And as a going away present, Jared, we have a publication for you.
Oh.
At the Edge of Camelot, Debating Economics in Turbulent Times, published by our very own Don Kastner, who's been a part of the economics department for over 50 years. And that's a book on the history of the department.
Okay, I'm going to read this on the plane.
All right.
All right, thank you very much.
And some quick thank yous before we depart. A thank you to Dean Carl Riffmeyer, who supported the Gamble and supports the economics department. And a big, big, big thank you to Sheila Gilroy. Believe me, this would not have happened without her. And we also want to give a thank you to our faculty, students, and staff of the economics department, and to all of our guests. So thank you, and have a great evening.